In the 1950s, the CIA began using Air America to support covert operations in Laos and Vietnam. The objective was clear: to reach areas where the U.S. military could not operate directly. Missions usually began at night. Aircraft flew at low altitude to avoid radar detection. Flight routes were deliberately planned over mountainous terrain and dense jungles. Radio communication was kept minimal, using only pre-arranged signals. Landing zones were often temporary. In many locations, there were no proper runway zone, short strips of dirt or grass. Pilots had only a few seconds to decide whether a landing was possible. If there was any suspicion of enemy presence on the ground, the aircraft immediately aborted the landing and withdrew. Secret cargo was unloaded from the aircraft: weapons, radio equipment, medical supplies, and cash. Local contacts collected the supplies immediately. There was no allowance for delay. Some missions were dedicated to extraction. In these operations, one or more CIA agents were removed after their identities had been compromised. Agents signaled their position using pre-arranged markers. The aircraft landed briefly, agents boarded, and takeoff followed immediately. Threats from the enemy were constant. Anti-aircraft fire, small arms fire, and sudden hostile engagement were common. Some aircraft were damaged, and in certain missions, aircraft failed to return. If a mission failed, it was not repeated in the same manner. New routes and new methods were adopted for subsequent operations. Each failure was analyzed, and the next mission was adjusted accordingly. As a result of these missions, the CIA maintained its internal agents, sustained its covert intelligence network, preserved operational presence in enemy-controlled regions. These missions continued for several years. Each flight was different, but the objective remained the same: to keep covert operations running without direct military involvement. These were the early missions of Air America. By the late 1950s, Air America missions were no longer limited. The enemy had realized that covert supply operations were taking place in Laos and Vietnam, though they did not know exactly how. As a result, surveillance increased, and every landing zone became more dangerous. The CIA changed mission procedures. Flights were conducted at even lower altitudes. Flight routes were altered for every mission. Repeated use of the same landing zone was stopped. Missions were no longer just about supply. Now they were a race against time. In several missions, pilots received last-minute updates about changes on the ground. At times, aircraft approached the landing zone but immediately aborted takeoff if the expected signal was missing. Enemy fire would begin at that exact moment. Extraction missions became the most dangerous. Agents were often injured. Sometimes multiple agents had to be extracted at once. Occasionally, fuel was limited, leaving the pilot only a single opportunity to succeed. Some missions saw aircraft sustain damage but still return safely. In some, planes slipped during landing. In others, supplies had to be offloaded and the aircraft take off immediately to survive. As missions increased, losses also rose. Some pilots went missing. Some missions were completely unsuccessful. Some flights never returned. Despite these setbacks, missions continued through Air America. The covert network remained operational. Local forces continued to receive support. CIA maintained its ground presence. By this stage, it had become clear that the operation could not remain secret for much longer. The enemy had recognized patterns, and questions began to arise on the international stage. This marked the point where the first phase of Air America was nearing its end. And the next stage would be far more controversial and dangerous. By the early 1960s, Air America missions had entered a critical phase. The enemy had recognized that covert air support was taking place in Laos and Vietnam. Anti-aircraft positions were increased. Surveillance of suspected landing zones was intensified. And intelligence began to be collected through local informants. To reduce risk, the CIA began limiting missions. The number of flights was reduced. Some landing zones were permanently closed. Extraction missions were prioritized, while supply missions decreased. In several final missions, the objective was clear: to extract agents already inside. The deployment of new agents was nearly halted. Time became the biggest constraint in these final missions. Enemy fire would start immediately. Some landings lasted only a few seconds. Instead of unloading cargo, only personnel were taken on board. In certain cases, pilots were ordered to abort the mission if landing was impossible, even if agents had to be left behind. These decisions were made at the mission level and were final. Losses had increased. Some aircraft were lost. Some pilots did not return. Some missions remained incomplete. Meanwhile, international attention increased on the unclear air activities in Laos. Political pressure led the CIA to gradually reduce Air America's operational role. Eventually, the initial covert Air America missions were shut down. Some operations were transferred under different code names. Some were completely terminated. Officially, these missions were never acknowledged. No detailed reports were released. Most information only became public years later through declassified files. Operationally, Air America had successfully extracted several key agents. Maintained the covert network over an extended period provided the CIA with practical experience in running covert air operations. The operation was not entirely successful, but it could not be considered a failure either. It was a functional covert operation that achieved its objectives to the extent possible. After Air America, the CIA used the same model in other regions under different names and methods. But that phase is another story. This marked the conclusion of the Operation Air America mission. This was the untold story of Air America, a covert operation that flew in the shadows, risking lives and shaping modern intelligence operations. The bravery, the risks, and the missions behind the scenes remain a testament to the complexity of war and espionage. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Spy Intelligence Hub. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a dive into real spy operations, secret missions, and intelligence agency history. Share your thoughts below. Which mission shocked you the most? And stay tuned, because the next story is even more dangerous, more covert, and will reveal secrets the world barely knows. Disclaimer: all content in this video is based on historical records, declassified documents, and verified sources. Spy Intelligence Hub does not promote any illegal activity, espionage, or violence. This channel is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and all events are presented as historical analysis. Viewer discretion is advised, as some missions involve sensitive operations from the past. Sources include declassified CIA documents, historical research papers, and verified public records. Any resemblance to current events or persons is purely coincidental.